Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of an American Discussion Podcast. I'm Drew, here with my co-host Michael. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well. We've had a little bit of a break since we recorded the last episode. I think by the time this comes out, there won't be much of a gap between the last couple episodes that came out and this episode. But here in our space and time, it's been a little while. Had some stuff going on at home. Did a lot of stuff. Been pretty busy. But today, actually, I finished up insulating my basement. So I put like some rigid foam insulation in the rim joists. And then today I actually went around and spray foamed all of them in. You know, keep them held in there nice and tight, and then make a barrier for air and insects and all those nasties that come in from outside. So hopefully that'll, solve a little bit of our energy efficiency problems this winter.
For sure.
What about you? How have you been?
Pretty good. I've been pretty busy myself, working on stuff for a craft show for next month, and I harvested my honey, I think, since the last time we talked on this.
Yes, we have not talked about that at all.
Yeah, dude, it was fucking crazy.
I think you gave me an estimate, but
what was the last estimate?
You gotta let us all know how much you actually got and how it went.
Yeah, what was the last estimate I gave you?
I think you said you were looking like you were gonna have about 2 gallons.
Yeah, so that was naive. I expected to get 1 gallon, just based off, I had a rough season. They weren't doing that great. And I didn't really know what to expect. A lot of the forums I'm in were giving me contrasting numbers as to how much to expect from each frame. So I was kind of just, throwing a gallon out. If I get more, great. If I get less, bummer, but whatever. So I harvested 5 frames, and that gave me 3 gallons of honey. 387 ounces, or 3 gallons. It was
a
crazy.
Pretty big jump from what you thought you were going to get.
Yes.
Once you started, filtering it out.
Yeah, it was crazy. I got a lot less wax than I expected, to be honest with you. But I got that rendered down this weekend. I made some fire starters, so I only got 2 egg cartons worth of fire starters though, so not as much as I'd hoped.
Well, that's okay.
But the honey is delicious, dude. It's fucking best honey I've ever had. Obviously, I'm a little biased in that, but if you've only ever had store-bought honey, this is night and day. You'll still have a little bit of that honey taste. Oh, so I got 3 gallons of raw unfiltered honey, or raw unprocessed honey. But I also got another gallon of what's called baker's honey, or actually probably about 3/4 of a gallon of baker's honey. That's basically, I took all the wax cappings that are still have honey in them, right? It's impossible to get it all out by just squeezing it and stuff. So put it in a crock pot, melted it down, and that heats up the honey and cooks it. That gets rid of a lot of the enzymes in the honey, but it's still edible, still shelf stable, everything like that. My wife's going to use it to make mead, and it's good for baking, hence the word baker's honey. But I know in the mead making process, and I could be completely wrong about this. I just read like 2 articles on it, so take this with a grain of salt. But apparently, if you use raw honey in mead, there's a higher probability of it failing because the enzymes within the honey eat the yeast.
Interesting.
So it doesn't actually ferment sometimes. It depends on a bunch of stuff, apparently, that I'm not smart enough to comprehend. But baker's honey kills all the enzymes, so that's no longer a problem. So she's going to use that for mead making and baking and stuff. So, but that's traditionally what you buy in the little bears at the grocery store is baker's honey. They say it's raw and unfiltered. It's just not true. And that's why it's all that amber brown. Mine's a relatively light gold.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it's real good. I'll definitely bring you some to deer camp.
Hell yeah, I can't wait to try it. Now, we have tried some, like, local honey that you buy at the grocery store, but I don't think we've ever bought, like, small batch farmer's market honey like we have with syrup. We've bought some of that, syrup that is locally sourced, and some guy does it in his backyard.
Yeah, I'm gonna tap kind of like maples next year.
Yeah, we have 2 maples right in our backyard. I don't know if we will be able to get anything out of that. I haven't done any research into it. One of the trees is diseased, and we got to get it taken down, and the other one's healthy. So I don't know which one would be the better candidate. I assume the healthy one, but I don't know.
Who knows? The interesting thing about honey is that you'll never get the same tasting honey from 2 different spots. And that's because, obviously, honey, I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, or how familiar any potential listeners are, but honey is made from the nectar of flowers that the bees ingest into what's called their honey stomach. Then the enzymes within the honey stomach modifies the nectar, and then they regurgitate it out and fan it with their wings until it lowers the moisture content down to what we consider honey. That being said, the nectar comes from all sorts of different flowers all the time. And so the flowers in your area are never going to be identical to the flowers in another area. So that flavor profile changes all the time.
So even if you ever get... Go ahead. Even if you have the same varieties of flowers from, say, one city to the next, the concentration of
each flower type in
each of those things is going to be different regardless
Correct.
Of where you, or I guess depending on where you are.
Correct. Another concern is certain flowers bloom more and longer in certain weather conditions. So my hive this year could have different tasting honey than it does next year, just based on the cycles of the flowers in the area.
Oh yeah, actually I bet that will be. And as a matter of fact, I would guess that the weather patterns this year probably favored your hive, since you had some trouble with it, with a longer season and, a little bit more time to regroup.
Yeah, and there was hardly any dearths in our area, which is when nothing's in bloom. So we had bloom most of the summer and most of the fall, so it was really good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anything else going on in your neck of the woods?
Just looking forward to the next 2 big things coming up.
Halloween.
I got next 3 big things coming up. Halloween, and then the election, and then deer camp. Obviously, the latter I'm most excited for.
Oh yeah, no, it's gonna be it's coming up soon. The second that everybody starts putting their costumes on, it's gonna be a busy couple of weeks, man.
Yep.
Early voting starts in my area, like I think on Halloween or the day before, something like that.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
So as soon as that happens, we're gonna be right into the election, and then
they still can't count until that day. But
what's that?
They still can't count the votes till that day. But
oh, right, that's true. But you start getting exit polls and all of that stuff, and then leading right up into that, and then like you said, deer camp's coming up right after that. So we'll have about a week or so to figure out how we feel about stuff, and then maybe we'll record an episode.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk about it while we're at deer camp too. But
yeah, absolutely.
So
go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I know you got a topic that you're pretty knowledgeable about coming up, so lay it on us. Let's see what you got.
All right, so today we are going to be talking about nuclear reactors, which is a topic that I have a lot of experience with, and I'm going to try and keep it general enough that the audience can follow what I'm talking about, especially people that don't have a lot of industrial or mechanical knowledge. I know you can probably pick up on a lot of stuff that your average person that has never worked on machinery or process equipment, HVAC, any kind of stuff like that, wouldn't be able to. So
yeah, I'm excited to learn more.
So what we're going to talk about today is, you sent me a video a couple of weeks ago where somebody was talking about the 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor starting back up in order to power Microsoft AI servers. Basically, their point, the point that they were making was that Microsoft was starting back up the 3 Mile Island reactors in order to, power this equipment. And the video presented itself in a certain way, and I kind of pointed out, line by line, how each of those claims was untrue, or kind of stretching the truth in a way that benefited what they were trying to say. Basically, these fear-mongering tactics. It was anti-nuclear, anti-Microsoft, anti-AI, some of which I can commiserate with, but I'm definitely a strong proponent of nuclear power. So
same.
I want to talk about what actually happened at 3 Mile Island. So one thing that a lot of people probably don't know is that 3 Mile Island, the accident, happened at 3 Mile Island Nuclear Generating Station in, or I guess around Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Now, the nuclear accident was a partial nuclear meltdown of the number 2 reactor at 3 Mile Island Nuclear Facility. So there are 2 nuclear reactors at this particular plant, and they are what's known as pressurized water reactors. So I will give kind of a breakdown of how this type of reactor works. So every nuclear reactor works on the principle of nuclear fission, wherein a neutron, if you remember back to the parts of an atom, a free neutron is accelerated and smashes into a giant atom of, a heavy nucleus, which normally is uranium. In all commercial nuclear power plants that I know of, especially in the United States and places like France, Japan, Russia, they all use uranium with certain degrees of different elements added in and different isotopes. We won't get into that a ton, but basically if you add different things into your mix of nuclear fuel, you'll get different results. Different heat profiles, different nuclear chain reaction speeds, and different elements after the nuclear chain reaction is over, some of which can be used to make things like nuclear weapons grade material, but for the most part that's not a huge concern with nuclear power plants. A nuclear reactor basically has to be purposely set up that way to get any meaningful amount of nuclear grade weapons material out of it. So a pressurized water reactor has this nuclear chain reaction happening in the middle of it, wherein these neutrons are blasting this nuclear fuel, mostly uranium, which then splits the uranium atom. And in that process, it generates a lot of heat. So as you can imagine, there's a ton of energy holding together a giant atom like uranium. So when you split it apart, all of those...
energy has to go somewhere.
Yep, all of those atomic bonds break, and that's given off in the form of energy. Mostly gamma radiation. So if you get right into the primary coolant of a nuclear reactor, you might turn into the Hulk, but you'll be immediately killed by the high temperatures and pressures and radioactivity of the fluid, so we'll never know.
Sign me up.
Yeah, so this gamma radiation, a ton of energy. We usually cool this fuel with water, heats up the water, so the water gets very hot, and then we keep it under a ton of pressure to maintain that as liquid. So when you heat up water way past the boiling point, we're talking hundreds of degrees over the boiling point, you have to keep it under a tremendous amount of pressure in order to stop it from boiling. And boiling is bad for heat transfer. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have something like nuclear fuel, which is at potentially thousands of degrees, and you get rid of the water and it's mostly steam, there's nowhere for that heat to go, and it just continuously heats up and heats up and heats up because of that nuclear chain reaction that's happening in the fuel. So what a pressurized water reactor does is it has this big boiler vessel that has a steam bubble on the top of it. You can think of it like a pressure cooker. So if you hooked up a pressure cooker to a tube that was attached to some kind of heat source and then piped that tube back into the pressure cooker, that pressure cooker would be maintaining pressure in that heat source. That's kind of how it works. I'm not going to get into a ton of specifics on that, except to say that that steam bubble in that boiler vessel called the pressurizer is very important for maintaining pressure. Okay, so in addition to that, you need pumps that circulate the water, and then you need two other independent boiler, or I guess at least one other independent boiler system that can transfer all of that heat into a different separate loop to cool it down and create steam. That steam is what we use to turn turbines. So in most cases, especially with pressurized water reactors, that radioactive liquid that's going through the nuclear fuel does not interact with the steam at all. So the steam is, clean, fresh water, and can be used for powering generators.
Which is pretty much how all power is made.
Yep.
So as long as we've generated electricity, really.
So for the most part, all power is generated by heating up water, turning it into steam, and sending it down through a turbine to spin the turbine and generate power on the associated generator. Mm-hmm. Recently, we've seen solar and wind energy, and obviously hydroelectric works on a similar principle, but with falling water instead of steam. But pretty much, with the exception of solar power, as long as you spin something really fast, it can generate electricity. Okay, so another kind of important part to this for the audience to understand is that that water that's boiled to make steam eventually gets condensed back down into water, and then there's pumps that pump that water back into the generator, the steam generator, and those pumps are called feed water pumps. So to get into what happened in the 3 Mile Island accident. So they were performing a maintenance operation without getting into specifics, they were using compressed air in the condensate system, the steam condensate system, and they blew compressed air into some kind of instrument line, and that instrument line caused a malfunction in a sensor that tripped off all of their condensate and feed water pumps. So now this is called a loss of feed water casualty in a nuclear reactor. So for some reason,
what does that mean?
For some reason, all of their pumps were linked together in a way that would allow them all to shut off simultaneously. So that's problem one here. And a loss of feed water casualty basically means that you are no longer putting water into that giant steam generator boiler that
so
is
you're about to just get
steam.
straight steam.
So yes, exactly. Eventually, and this is, somewhere in a matter of minutes to maybe an hour or two, depending on the size of these boilers and the temperatures that they're operating at, all that water is going to turn into steam. And the way these boilers are set up is that the very, very hot water that is attached to the nuclear fuel, the primary coolant is what it's called, that water, the radioactive water, is going through the bottom of the boiler, and it's going through these really, really tiny tubes, and when those get too hot, they can rupture.
And then all the pressure releases.
All the pressure from the primary coolant releases, and all that radioactivity will go into the low pressure secondary side, which is, the steam side, the side that has the generator, the side that is not protected from those high pressures and temperatures. So all in all, very bad day. And that rapid depressurization in the primary coolant, again, like we talked about earlier, if you release that pressure, it will turn it all into steam. So that example that I brought up earlier of steam being around that primary, or the nuclear fuel rather, that's what will ultimately cause a meltdown. So that's not what happened here. When there is a loss of feed water casualty, because that is a big concern, as temperatures rise, as that boiler boils dry, the pressure in your primary coolant goes up, and you have a relief valve. In this case, there's multiple relief valves as fail-safes. In case the first one doesn't work, there's a second one that will, go off. But in this case, kind of the opposite happened, which is that temperatures rose, the relief valve opened, and then the relief valve never shut. So now, as they're attempting to get things back under control, there's a ton of confusion in the control room. People don't know what's going on. They don't understand. The pressurizer water level went up as temperatures went up, and then it dropped back down as temperatures started going down. But then, they weren't able to get everything back online. And then nobody really recognized that this relief valve was stuck open. And without getting into a ton of specifics, there were some big design problems in this type of reactor. It was supposed to be very safe, and it was a fairly safe design for a reactor. It had plenty of fail-safes. Unfortunately, one of their downfalls was that the operators in the control room were living with a bunch of alarms that were just constantly going off. So
from failed maintenance schedules and such.
Yeah, more so that there were alarms for unnecessary things, so they just had a wall of alarms, right? And then when these critical alarms were going off, they couldn't understand.
They just blended in with the rest.
Yeah, exactly. Like what was new, what was old, what mattered, what didn't matter, all of that kind of stuff. So now one of the big design principles with nuclear reactors is ensuring that, the human operator can understand what's going on at all times, especially during an emergency.
I don't see how that's that necessary, to be honest with you.
How it's necessary?
Yeah, I think that's just engineering BS, huh?
Yeah, now,
I mean,
there
can't be that hard, right?
There are some people that say that we should just let computers run these things, and
that's scarier than the
honestly.
Other option?
I think computers, if we put a single computer system in charge of, these operations, they could go on forever, but they could also, get stuck in a reboot screen and, then your whole reactor goes down. That's an oversimplification, but
modern tech, what would stop a breach of security, so to speak? And allow for the tampering of some other, foreign nations' reactors.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You would have to keep it away from the internet, right? It would have to be totally standalone. And then, then you come into problems with, glitches and software updates and all that kind of stuff. So, that's one reason why a lot of stuff isn't automated that, really probably could be and would be in other industries. But for nuclear power, most of the actual decision making comes down to a human operator still. Now, when a relief valve in the primary coolant system gets stuck open, this transitions into a different type of casualty, and that is a loss of coolant casualty. And when you start losing that coolant that's under extremely high pressures, the pressure goes down. So it starts to seem a little bit like deja vu here, where your pressure goes down, your temperatures keep going up, and now you have steam in your nuclear fuel again. So either way.
So what does steam do to nuclear fuel? What's the risk here?
So either way, you end up with steam in your nuclear fuel, and if your nuclear fuel is surrounded by steam instead of water, the heat cannot transfer away from the nuclear fuel fast enough. And the way that the reaction works is that the center is constantly at this, extremely high temperature, and it transfers heat to the outside of the nuclear fuel and into the water, right? And if you take that water away, the outside of the nuclear fuel heats up. And now that heat that's being generated constantly in the center of the fuel has nowhere to go, right? So then everything starts to heat up more and more and more. So let's say if you started off at, let's say 500 degrees in the center. Now,
what's a unit of measurement?
500 Fahrenheit. Let's say, and you take away that water, replace it with steam. Now the outside gets to 500 Fahrenheit, but the chain reaction is still happening. So that center rises to 600, 700, 800, 900, and it just keeps going and going and going. And that's how a nuclear meltdown happens, is that it just reaches temperatures beyond what any, metal material can stand, higher than forge temperatures, which means that your metal just melts and you come up with this giant molten pile of radioactive material. This is very unlikely in any kind of reactor design. We've really only had 3 major examples of this in the history of nuclear power. That's Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima. There have been some other small meltdowns and accidents, but either fail-safes worked the way they were supposed to, or it was during some kind of testing where the nuclear yield was so small as to be kind of insignificant. So
real quick, what does this disaster look like for those that aren't familiar with the meltdowns? Is this like, are we talking like an atom bomb explosion? Or are we talking like, when you're watching that Tom Cruise movie and one of the steam pipes blow and the guys, they still kind of walk through it, but they don't? What are we talking here?
No, so what this actually looked like was that the nuclear power plant was operating as it normally did. There was just a bunch of emergency vehicles in the parking lot. There's really nothing that will distinguish a nuclear accident in progress from normal operations of the nuclear power plant. You're not going to know it's happening. The big risk that can happen during a nuclear accident is that hydrogen is generated in the containment facility, and when you have hydrogen get to that explosive level, then it creates a hydrogen explosion, which can then breach your containment building that is supposed to contain all this radioactive particulate in the event of an accident. And that's what happened in Chernobyl, Fukushima. It just, that hydrogen gets to a point where it just makes an explosion, kind of, I don't want to say blows the roof off of things, but it generates pressure enough to blow out gaps where air can get out, and therefore that radioactive particulate. So 3 Mile Island did spread some radioactive particulate around the area. Fukushima did. Chernobyl obviously did. But the scale of 3 Mile Island was very, very small compared to some of these other radioactive events that we've had in our history. For example, like Hiroshima, Nagasaki, those bombs, they distributed a ton of radioactive particulate. However, it was a different kind. And then Chernobyl, obviously, is the big one that generated a ton of radioactive fallout. But the 3 Mile Island incident mostly released short-lived radioactive nuclides, which means that they decayed away almost instantaneously or within the next few hours to a day. Now, there was some spread of radioiodine, and the radioiodine that was released was pretty insignificant. Even the most affected populations only got less than the amount that you would get from getting an x-ray at the doctor's office. So on the terms of like population-wide significance and incidence of cancer, you're going to see essentially zero for the 3 Mile Island accident.
So as a resident layperson, I want to clarify something real quick, because you're kind of breezing over it, and I realize it's because you're very familiar with it, and it's probably a pretty docile term that everyone really understands in your community. But what is radioactive iodine? What is that? What are the effects it can have? What is it? What's the risk of it?
Good question,
I mean?
And thank you for bringing me back to that, because I meant to explain that in my discussion. Radioiodine is one of the nuclides of concern, so that basically it's a radioactive isotope that when you breathe it in or ingest it, it goes through your body, and your thyroid is very, very good at absorbing iodine, and it's radioactive. So one of the things that happens when there's a very large release of radioiodine is that people's thyroids absorb them, and it essentially kills off your thyroid, and causes, these diseases of what would essentially be hypothyroidism, or thyroid cancer. So a thing that communities do and nuclear power plants do when there's a threat of a nuclear meltdown is they distribute iodine tablets to basically
That's potassium iodide, right?
Yep, to flood your thyroid with a different form of iodine, so that way it can't absorb anymore until the threat of the event, whatever it is over. And that's really the biggest risk of a radioactive release of this kind.
While you're explaining things, how about you give us what a nucleotide is?
So a nuclide is essentially just a radioactive isotope. Just a different term for that, essentially.
Okay. I don't want to keep going down the scientific definition thing, because the next one would be isotope, but I think high school level chemistry should get most of us there.
Yep. Okay. So that's what happened with the 3 Mile Island Unit 2 reactor. It was I don't want to say small meltdown, but relatively minor on the scale of what could happen. They were able to recover pressure control in the plant and get it under control eventually. There's a whole lot of other discussion to be had about the 3 Mile Island incident and how it was initially reported, some of the design factors that led to the incident, why they didn't discover it sooner, all these different types of things. And I would love to do a full-length episode just on that, but we don't have a ton of time, and my audience isn't the nuclear scientist type, so we'll move on to
not yet. You can still win them.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I could just start doing lectures about nuclear physics to the point where our entire loyal audience is just nuclear physicists.
Dude, we could just do back and forth weather and nuclear.
But so that's the background on 3 Mile Island Plant 2. So 3 Mile Island Plant 1 is the one that potentially is going to be reopened. And that plant actually was in operation for quite a long time. So the one plant was decommissioned in 2019. So that is almost 40 years after the original accident of Unit 2. So the exact same identical design of nuclear power plant was in safe operation for an additional 40 years. And obviously they did some upgrades and, made some pretty big changes after the initial accident. I think they ended up shutting down the other reactor for an extended shutdown pretty soon after the other one. But this reactor has been essentially in what you would call like a hibernation state for the last 5 years, which means that it's shut down, but they're still, running all the systems, keeping up on the maintenance, all of that kind of stuff. And now this push to reopen and restart 3 Mile Island 1 comes as a result of a bunch of different factors coming together, and one of those is, in fact, Microsoft. So Microsoft essentially promised that they would buy a certain amount of power, kilowatt hours, from this nuclear facility if they were to restart. So the idea of restarting a decommissioned nuclear power plant is a pretty new idea, but this is not the first one that has done it. Palisades nuclear power plant in Michigan is also in the process of restarting, and this the Palisades program started about 2 years ago, if I recall correctly, when they announced their intentions to restart that one. And in a similar fashion, the reason that Palisades nuclear power plant was able to get the funding to initiate this restart is because other companies and the state of Michigan promised that they would buy a certain amount of kilowatt hours of, the nuclear generated energy for a certain number of years. So basically, if you can promise these people that you can buy essentially 100% of their energy for a certain number of years, that math starts to make sense of, okay, well, I'm going to spend this much money on restarting it, which is, a way cheaper than building a new power plant from scratch. You already have all of these systems. They're already tested. You already know that the way they were designed is, very sound. The materials that were made, that made up the power plant, they're very strong. You can replace every single gasket and jointed connection in the entire power plant just to make sure. But you essentially, rather than building a new one from scratch, you just take this old one and dress it up a little bit, and start making power again. And now I don't want to oversimplify that. So I do want to say that when these nuclear power plants are restarted, they have to go through the entirety of the nuclear commissioning process again. So they have to do inspections along every inch of piping, every inch of electrical cable, every inch of instrumentation, check out every point on the entire project, including all of the shielding from radiation and all of the, containment buildings. Everything, every fail-safe has to be checked out.
And I'm okay with that. I think we should probably do that.
Absolutely. It is 100% necessary. If you're going to start up one of these older plants, you need to. And in fact, I would say you probably should do more extensive testing than, a brand new one. Because those brand new power plants, they're going to have all of their factory testing. It's going to have all of these, things that say, hey, we just forged this steel. We just, welded this joint. Here's the inspection report. Here's, all of our testing that we did. But for an older power plant, all of that stuff is going to be, potentially 50
brand
years
new.
old.
Oh, so, for an older one, yeah.
So you have to inspect more thoroughly, and instead of just saying, okay, well, 40 years ago this steel was, this thickness,
brand
and this
new,
strong. Maybe let's do some testing to make sure that pipe is still this thick and it's still this strong and that weld is still good, right? So you may have to do some unique and unprecedented testing, and it's going to be expensive, but again, not as expensive as building a brand new one. And then along with that comes some what I would say are needed upgrades for redundancy and, nuclear fail-safes, security, all of that kind of stuff. They're going to bring that up to like a more modern code, essentially to ensure that some of those really easy things that they can do to prevent an accident get fixed. So we're not talking about having this reactor that's, you know, nearly as old as the Chernobyl reactors coming back online just as it was. It's gonna get an upgrade as well. So I've heard a lot of negative talk about this 3 Mile Island restart, but it's not being financed entirely by Microsoft. Microsoft did not buy the company. They did not buy the reactor. They just essentially promised that they would buy enough energy to make it worth it for them to restart.
Do we know if there's anything in place to prevent them from, let's say, so the main purpose they're doing it for is for AI power generation, right? To be able to say that they have a clean initiative because AI is such a huge drain on our electrical grid and how much of the power we consume as a nation. They want to be able to do it green in a way that's more safe for the planet and reusable and all that type of stuff. Is there any way that we can hold them to that agreement? Should say the government puts a 10-year stop on AI, right? They just want to take some time, figure out what's going on. I know that idea has been floated in the halls of Congress. Is there any way to prevent them from backing out at that point?
No, I don't think so. And also, I don't think that anti-AI legislation is really going to get its footing before the AI bubble kind of collapses. We've seen a huge jump in AI technology and, you know, these machine learning algorithms. And it's been pretty incredible to see, but I don't think we're going to see too huge a leap before companies start to realize that they're going to go bankrupt if they keep doing this. It's not profitable. It never has been. Maybe one company will win out and, you know, basically become the Apple or Microsoft of AI.
A monopoly?
Yeah, or just like the big power player that has all the research money and, you know, all of that. But I don't think they're going to be doing anything too innovative with it. I think they'll mostly be using it to pad their bottom line, you know, like just they'll be focusing it on efforts that are marketable to consumers, not efforts that are trying to put people out of business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I tend not to think that any of us can particularly predict how new technology is going to affect the market, especially. I mean, that's the whole thing about stock projections and shit. But I also think it'd be kind of... So one of the big fears with AI in particular is that it gets away from us, right? We make something smarter than ourselves and we can no longer contain it. At that point, we run into a big problem, not only from the market standpoint, but from the regulation standpoint. So I think it's kind of hard for anyone to say what we think is going to happen as far as that goes. My only point there was that I know this has been spoken about in our legislature. So I just want to make sure that, if we are investing in this, and I think you and I are on the same page with nuclear, we think this is the way forward with renewable energies and climate change and stuff like that. What could we do as a populace? And you might not have this answer. I'm just asking the smartest guy on the topic that I know that's in the room. What could we do as a populace to encourage the use of nuclear or prevent its demonization for another 40 years?
I think so. In this episode, I have presented kind of the cold hard facts on one nuclear accident. I just want to clarify that there have for each nuclear accident that's happened, we've had thousands of other nuclear reactors that have been totally safe for their entire, operating history. When you look at the deaths and incidences of cancer caused by nuclear power, it's dwarfed by those of the coal industry, and even wind energy is very dangerous to the technicians and workers. Mm-hmm. So nuclear power actually is one of the safest energy production options out there. And the big debate that people like to bring up is about the storage of nuclear fuel. However, we have the technology to contain that and, just let it decay. So
yeah, I don't tend to get behind that argument, especially when you look at what they're doing with CO2 currently, and how they're literally actually currently trying to run a pipeline. I don't know if you ever got a chance to watch that video I sent you about a month back, but where they're pumping it into I want to say North Dakota just to store underground, as a part of a carbon recapture program. I think if we're able to do that, I don't see why we couldn't at least logistically do it with nuclear waste.
Yeah, honestly, I think the long-term effects of polluting the atmosphere with greenhouse gases is a lot worse than the long-term effects of letting, spent fuel decay for, 200 years. It's really not that long when you look at the big picture time scale. 200 years ago was, basically 1800, right? And
America was a country.
Yeah, America was a country. Not quite the time of the Civil War yet, but just before that.
So let me ask you this on this whole bearing thing. I don't know if you can answer this question or not, but about how much waste, if you had to give it like a generic volume, would one plant produce in a year? Because I think a lot of the fear behind nuclear is none of us really understand it. Part of that is from the shroud of secrecy that the government has ensured. Part of that, I'm not sure if this is true, but I'm fairly certain that anything in discussion at all that could be used for a nuclear weapon immediately becomes classified on the spot. Regardless of, even if it's student work notes at a college. I know there was a case of that. But basically, what I'm trying to get to here is the fear of nuclear energy is that none of us understand it. So it helps when we're talking nuclear waste. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking those toxic barrels with the nuclear radiation side on them that are leaking. How much in a volume could we expect from a reactor, like a power plant type thing, or do you not know?
So it depends with each, nuclear reactor and nuclear reactor site, but the mass or volume of spent nuclear fuel generated, you said per year, would be pretty small for each reactor. You can think like 55-gallon drum size per year, and that's kind of on the larger end. So
okay.
I think one estimate that I saw was basically that per year for all of the reactors in the United States, you wouldn't even fill half of a swimming pool, like a standard size swimming pool, with nuclear waste. So if you think about that, one of the leading designs right now is that you contain it in a storage capsule, basically, which is like lead lined, steel made. They're made in a shape that will resist any kind of natural disaster, like an earthquake or a hurricane, flooding, anything like that. They're made out of materials that don't rust. You basically just I know people say you want to bury them, but they actually don't really bury them. They put them above ground in places where, there's really no access to it. But those containers, if you take a Geiger counter up to it, they're really not much above background. Like, when you take a Geiger counter to it, you're getting a very small increase in background radiation, which if you take a Geiger counter on an airplane, it goes off wildly. So even in that case, it's very safely stored.
So what I'm hearing is the more I fly, the more likely I am to get superpowers.
Yes.
Okay,
you can grow a third arm if you fly every day.
So does that work on Spirit too?
Spirit Airlines?
Yeah. Or is that like something you had to pay more for?
I don't know. I feel like you would probably have to pay more since they're super cheap. And Southwest, you can't choose if you want an extra arm or an extra leg. You get what you get. First come, first serve.
Get what you get. Don't bitch a fit. Okay. I'd take a couple inches, but I guess a leg would be fine.
So yeah, that's pretty much all I had as far as that topic. Unless you have any other questions, I can talk about this stuff all day. I didn't really get into a whole lot of like lobbying for nuclear power in this episode, but again, like you said, I do think it's the cleanest and safest method that we can use to generate power. And I guess to answer one of your earlier questions too, while I'm at it, even if this AI thing doesn't really pan out as like the thing that Microsoft's going to sink a bunch of power into, data centers take a ton of power. And one of the big ideas right now is that each data center or data center hub will have its own like small nuclear reactor that fuels all of the energy required to power, those mega data centers or, multiple data centers all in one campus. But right now we don't have the technology or I guess like the economic willpower to build those small nuclear reactors. So this is kind of a step in the right direction. If Microsoft can say, hey, we've already powered these, data centers with nuclear power. We've invested in it. We want to invest in individual small nuclear reactors for our new data centers. That'll get some political sway behind it.
Okay, so AI might get us to green energy.
Yeah, potentially.
I'm here for it.
All right. Well, I know you wanted to talk about something different as well towards the end of the episode. So what do you want to get into?
Yeah, so I'd like to kind of talk about state of the race, kind of see where we're at. We do a decent amount of politicking on this show, so I think now is an important time to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty. So I want to go over a little bit of polling as of where it stands right now. I'm currently using Real Clear Polling with their averages. It's the easiest for me to read. I also have the Atlas poll pulled up right now. That was the most accurate poll of the last presidential election. They had the best margin of error. So I would have to find it on there, so I'll do that in another point now. But
so just to be clear, I've been using a website called 270 to Win, both this year and for the last election. I'll be real honest, I did not do any research on how those polls performed up until the election last year, but it does have like a scatter plot with the margins of error, and it compiles all of the different polls, so it kind of gives you, a compilation of how each of the different polls are doing and combines that into one number. Again, I don't know if that sways one way or the other, but that is what I have been looking at this year, and that's what I'm going to look at for this discussion.
Okay. Right off the bat, this one seems to lean Democrat. I'm seeing a couple of key differences in the map from what I'm seeing. Hold on, let me do side by side. It'll be easier for this conversation. Okay. So I'm looking. Is there a way on this one to change it to get rid of toss-ups?
You can filter by a bunch of different things. I don't think you can exclude the swing states, if that's what you're saying.
Okay, yeah. So basically what I'm seeing, a couple of key differences in yours to mine. Real Clear is showing Montana's a stronger win. Doesn't really matter. It's only a 4 state. Yours is already calling Minnesota as a I want to say it's a lean, but I got to find the key here. Oh, no, they have Minnesota as a likely. I think. They should have a different color,
Minnesota on the poll that I'm looking at is Harris by 6.5%, which pretty much tracks with the last 20 years of Minnesota voting history.
Well, let's see. Okay, so I'm looking at poll data of Minnesota right now. So Rasmussen, KSTP, Star Tribune, they all show Harris plus anywhere from 0.3 to 3 points to 6 points. I don't. Holy shit! It's letting me edit this thing. This is weird.
Yeah, and again, this website is like an aggregate. I don't want to get too wrapped up in specific websites, but I do think it's interesting to, kind of see the difference in the polling websites that we're kind of drawn to.
Yeah.
I like this one because it aggregates all of them. I don't know what their
So
algorithm is. You're right. It could just insert some kind of bias into it one way or the other. But you know me, I have some trust for people even in big tech when I probably shouldn't.
So the main thing I want to go after right now and kind of discuss, and you'll have to find it on yours because I don't want to have to learn your entire website too, just for the sake of this conversation. I'll definitely take a look at it off the pod, but what I'm seeing right now, and tell me if yours is different, but from what I'm seeing, all of the swing states are trending Trump right now, with Wisconsin at the lowest margin of 0.2. And the highest of Arizona at plus 1.6 for Trump. But every single one across the board is showing that to me.
And that's pretty much been the trend the last couple of weeks. They've gone back and forth, but I think what you're saying is that you've been seeing polling at either dead even for swing states or leans Trump. I've been seeing basically dead even, and then certain states will lean Trump or lean Harris, kind of back and forth. I'm actually seeing Nevada is leaning Harris within the margin of error, Michigan to Trump within the margin of error.
Yeah, all of this is within margin of error.
Yeah, Arizona and Georgia within the margin of error to Trump. North Carolina within the margin of error to Trump. Pennsylvania within the margin of error to Trump. But yesterday or 2 days ago, it was within the margin of error to Harris. Wisconsin within the margin of error to Harris. And then, when you get outside of those states, everything goes basically +5 in one way or the other. Or more, to the point where you have places like Tennessee, that's 21% to Trump, and Massachusetts, which is 28% to Harris. So you have some pretty wild differences, but that's kind of to be expected based on the makeup and how those places have voted in the past.
Yeah, and obviously past voting has something to do with it. I think this election kind of stands apart from all of them, with the replacement of the Democratic nominee, right? So I don't know how many times it's happened in the past where the main one party's nominee backs out.
I think it's been at least twice.
3 months before.
From when we looked at it before. At least twice.
None of them are in modern history, right? So our polling is obviously not going to be very relatable to any recent election. That being said, if you look at the poll averages, right? So this is a congregation of the different polls averaged out. So obviously nothing too particularly accurate, but really no polls are until the exit polls. So at the time of Biden's dropout, we were seeing Trump at 46.7 and Biden at 42. So obviously that was a Trump plus 4 at that point. And then as soon as Harris was announced, it was Trump at 2.6. A lot of that, I'm sure, was a lot of people's lack of faith in Biden. And I'm always it's always interesting to me when I talk to other Biden voters who are now Harris voters, why that is, because nobody wants to talk about his senility, mainly because he's still the president. And that gets into the weird Article 25 stuff. But nonetheless, once he was gone, you see the Democratic support go from 42% up to 45% almost overnight. And I think that was a big portion of just a new candidate. She had a honeymoon phase. She started jumping up until August is when it was all Trump until the first one was the tie was August 26th. And then Harris has been up until September 21st. And he's been up the remainder of the time and is now opening that gap up to a 1 point in the aggregate. So obviously, again, that's a bunch of different models with a bunch of different margins of error, plenty of room. I don't think anyone can safely say that this is a blow-away race in either direction. But I think it's looking one way pretty heavy right now, in my opinion, especially when you get to some of the finer nuanced details. Go ahead.
Did you have something else to add? I was going to just add my rebuttal.
Yeah, so one thing I think, and then I'll pass it off to you. One thing that I think is going to be really troubling. There's actually two things that I think are really troubling for Harris right now. One was the internal polling of the Teamsters. I think that she's losing blue-collar support, which the Democrats have heavily relied on for the last, 20 years. And that's starting to wane pretty heavily, and they're starting to move over to the Trump camp from at least all the polling that I've seen. The other one is young black men. They are tending to move away from her. Now, she's actually picking up steam with black women compared to Biden from what I've heard. Again, that's what I've heard, not what I've seen. I haven't dug too deep into that. But I think those two things are severely hurting her. And I don't see that getting any better. And all of the swing states are have some form of pretty decent sized union in them, which I think is what's going to make the difference personally. But I want to give you a chance for your rebuttal. What do you got?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think all of the swing states are pretty egalitarian and mixed. Kind of evenly between rural and urban and, blue collar, white collar, people of color. And that's what makes it, that's what makes those swing states right now kind of a, a microcosm of the U.S. as a whole. And one point I wanted to say was that the aggregate that I'm looking at has Harris up by 1.5 nationwide in like the popular vote.
Yeah, that's not a big enough margin for.
Again, doesn't necessarily mean anything. People can lose the nationwide popular vote and come out ahead in the electoral college. Like, say if you have California by 90% or something, and like, you know, you just shit the bed on the rest of the U.S. I don't think anyone's going to argue that, you know, even though you lost the popular vote, just because California voted almost 100% for one party or the other, you know, or you know, Texas and Florida, it's not necessarily a good snapshot of how our system works as a whole. Which I know you and I are both proponents of ranked choice voting. I think that would benefit us. I don't particularly like that. I feel like I am compelled to vote for, you know, one party or the other. I know you also don't. You would prefer to vote for a third party candidate. I would almost certainly vote for a third party candidate if I thought that, you know, it would, you know, be, I guess I don't want to say not a wasted vote, but, you know, if I thought that it would be.
I want to cut in on this because I see where you're going with this, and this is something that really frustrates me. It's particularly about young Americans. Is that the system is set up in a way where young Americans aren't really factored in. They're what's called, for those that don't know, low propensity voters. So they might vote in an election or two, but they don't typically vote. So they're not really factored into the demographics of the voting pool typically, right? They're not nearly as heavy as senior citizens or even, especially not middle class suburban women. So I think that is a futile message, and I've gotten that my whole life. I don't think I've never been a registered Republican to my knowledge. I mean, maybe when I turned 18, I might have. I really don't remember, to be honest with you, but I've been a libertarian for as long as I can remember. And I'm strongly against the third party vote as a wasted vote. I think that's foolish. I think that a lot of people in our country hate the idea of a two-party system. We all see the flaws in it. We see what's wrong with it. And then we do nothing about it. It's a lot of whining and fussing about it. But then we're afraid to vote that way. And I get it. This is a very important election. I think I struggle to say it. I don't think this is the most important election of our lifetime, to be honest. I know a lot of people on both sides say it is. I think either way, bad stuff can come from this election. It's not like one side is the saving grace and nothing bad will happen, and then the vice versa is if the other side wins, then it's civil war. I think either way, the risk is pretty high for bad stuff to happen. So maybe not this election. But I think that people not voting third party because they're afraid their vote doesn't count means that we'll never get out of the two-party system. So if we truly believe that the two-party system is bad for America, which I do, then we need to do something in order to break that. And the only way we can do that, and the deck is stacked against us, the only way we can do that is to vote third party regularly. And even if we don't get a third party, make these people earn our votes. Let's not just sit in buckets where we're guaranteed to these politicians so they can keep doing whatever nonsense they want to do because they don't actually have to work for a vote. They know California's going blue. They know fucking Texas is going red. They know, you know what I mean? Like, let's not give them these guarantees. Make them do what we want them to do.
Yeah, no, I
voting
totally
party
agree
line
with
is
that.
the problem.
And I think the big problem with ranked choice voting is that the powers that be stand to lose something from putting that in place. So why would they ever allow that to happen, right? Why would they ever vote on that to be, an amendment to the state constitution? We have a couple of states that have started doing that already, but it's not like your Florida's, your Texas, Minnesota, Michigan. Those places are going to do it when they feel like they are going to lean one way or the other, and then ranked choice voting could totally throw it the opposite way, right? Or to a third party, and then that doesn't serve the bigger Republican or Democratic machine, as you were saying.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think, getting out and protesting and writing your congressmen, your senators and representatives, that can go a long way. But in a way, I do agree with what you're saying. Maybe throwing third-party support and in conjunction with all those other things could be enough to make people say, okay, well, if I do this for you, maybe you'll vote for our party, and that'll be enough to get them to put that to ballot.
Yeah, I think short of the Rand Paul era, we are currently in the most susceptible era for a third party to happen. 30% roughly of America says they're Republican, 30% says that they're Democrats, and the other 30 tends to be independents or third parties. So that's why this race is so tumultuous right now, is because there's so many independents that need to be won. That they're having to fight for us, right? So this is also why I think RFK got such a huge support this year, because both of our candidates have been shit.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think Kamala Harris is a bad candidate, and
I do.
One of the things that I wanted to respond to was that I do think that Joe Biden probably would have lost this race, just no doubt about it.
Oh, absolutely.
People are sick of seeing, these old white fucking politicians, on their, on their ballot, right? And
so
Donald Trump is he's supposed to be kind of an antithesis to that, but in reality, when we look at his politics and everything, it's kind of the same thing. He does add a little bit of spice and flair and unpredictability to the ballot, which a lot of people are enticed by. I will say that, like, there is something to be said about like shaking things up in politics, and that's kind of what he's been running on for the last 8 years, right? Or I guess almost 10 now. But when you were talking about that huge jump in polls, when Harris was announced as the new nominee,
mm-hmm.
I do think that's for a few reasons. Obviously, not an old white man, black woman, and she presents herself as a progressive, which is something that a lot of young people want to see. Now, do I agree with that? Not really, but I mean,
you don't think she's a progressive?
Donald Trump and the Republicans, they want to paint her as like the most radical, liberal that's ever been on the ballot. I don't necessarily think so, but definitely giving out some more liberal policies than both Biden and Obama. Definitely Clinton.
So first off, I want to come back at that a little bit. Trump and the Republicans aren't the first ones that painted her as the most liberal. There was multiple things that when she was in the Senate that she was the most liberal senator in the Senate. So that's already happened. She's also a San Francisco politician, which by default makes her a pretty liberal politician. As someone who lived in California, it's a very, very, very liberal state. I cannot stress that enough. It's actually kind of Twilight Zone-y how liberal it is. And that's coming from a pretty liberal state, Michigan. It was still night and day. Another thing that I wanted to touch on, you said that most of your points right there, not all of them, but a large chunk of your points was just identity politics. And I think that's a fault of the Democratic Party, is that, and I think that's also why Trump is running such a hot race right now. I think if they would have left that out, they'd be doing much better right now, but they're not.
Just to push back on that just a little bit, I think Kamala Harris has done a fantastic job of not running on identity politics. I'm just stating the fact of the matter. Like, people notice that it's a thing that
the fact of the matter. Elaborate.
A criticism of.
You can't just say stuff and then say it's the fact of the matter. That's not how that works. You need to back that up. What do you mean?
I'm saying she is a black woman. That is the fact of the matter. I'm saying that a big criticism of the candidates that have been running in the last 20 years, or I guess really forever. Besides Hillary Clinton was a woman. For the major tickets, is that they're all old white men, right? And Obama was the youngest president in however many years, and he was still old and gray by the time he left the White House. So I'm just saying that plays a factor in people's support, whether we want it to or not.
So I just want to point out. Joe Biden literally said multiple times before he was elected that his VP would be a black woman. So she was picked literally on her identity. Maybe she was the best of those options. I think he said he was 3 or 4. I don't really remember. I want to say it was 4.
I think
he was considering 4 black women.
Was that there are plenty of options that can embody those different I guess genetic makeups, for lack of a better term, perfectly competent people that might not be considered because of the makeup of politics in the past. So
how is that picking someone because they're a black and a woman? How is that not identity politics?
I mean, you can definitely argue that it is, and I mean,
100%. I don't think you can argue that it's not.
What I'll say
that's what I'm saying
was that perhaps it's identity politics for the sake of identity politics. Like, say, hey, this person can succeed. Here's a role model for all of you people. Here's to show that the makeup of America can represent America. It's not just.
I'm of a different camp on that train of thought. That there you go again. This is another thing in the liberal. That's another identity politics, old white men. But that's just a wicket. So, I'm of the belief system that politicians should not be your role models. I think we all pretty much unanimously agree that politicians are scummy people. Except for the one person that you decide to support or whatever. So let's not say that we need to elect someone to the highest position in the land, in charge of the nuclear football, the commander-in-chief, in charge of the world's strongest military that it's ever seen, because it could be a good role model for a kid in the future. I think that's foolish and naive way to do that.
I don't think that old white men couldn't successfully run the United States until the end of time.
See,
I'm sure they could.
you're still injecting race and gender here.
I'm telling you, I'm giving a rebuttal to what you're saying.
Okay.
I'm saying I don't think that it was necessary or this huge thing that needed to happen to shake it up so that we don't, get snuffed out as a country. I'm just saying that when you look at it as a broad topic, one of the big sticking points on both sides, don't forget, like before Donald Trump ran for president, everybody was all pissed off that, we've only got 2 old white men up here on the ballot, right? It's not to say identity.
I have a problem with your verbiage, but I understand your point.
I literally saw the exact phrase, hundreds of times. Now, obviously, Barack Obama was not an old white man. He was, a middle-aged black man, but people had plenty of criticisms of him, regardless of that. But
no, I will say that I think Barack Obama's election was the most racially charged one we've seen in a long time from both sides. I think there was a large constituency that voted for him because he was black, and a large constituency that refused to vote for him because he was black. I think that was very real in our history. But the fact that he got elected by one of the largest margins in United States history tells me that it wasn't the most racially... the U.S. wasn't the most racist as it ever has been during that time, right?
Honestly, I think there were a lot of factors that led up to that. He had a, hugely inspirational campaign philosophy, and then...
Yeah, he's a great speaker. I've said that. I'll say that till I'm blue in the face. He's the best speaker that politics has seen in a long time, probably since Reagan.
Absolutely. He is amazing. I think some of his speeches will probably go down in history, just like how we read certain presidential speeches, JFK, Abraham Lincoln.
I don't think he's got any tear down this wall lines, but no, I think he was a great speaker.
No, but,
I disagree with him on most of his policies, but as far as being a speaker, I think he was great.
Some of those speeches, they didn't get recognition in their time. It was just, after the fact, like Abraham Lincoln's 407 years ago, that was given to a crowd of, don't quote me on this, but like 50 people. And, it was only because of like people, newspaper
that is
coverage.
A lot more than 50 people now.
I disagree based on how math works, but I take your point based on what would you call it, population inflation?
Yeah. So even with the way math works, if you want to be a prick, we can do that. 50
okay.
people is a higher percentage.
Welcome to the argument, Mr. Dickhead.
So 50 people is a higher percentage of 10 million people than it is of 300 million people, is all I'm saying.
I agree.
And the bigger factor is the ability for people to travel that distance to go see a politician has been vastly improved since then. But again, this has nothing to do with our conversation, so it's just me being a prick.
If you follow the... what would you call it, like heavy left-wing media, basically the garbage left-wing media sites, you would think that Donald Trump can only attract 50 people to his rallies.
Which is wildly staggering.
And J.D. Vance even less than that.
Yeah.
Again, just to put this out there for everybody, Andrew and I are not like ultra conservative and ultra liberal. Like, no. Honestly, we would probably both vote third party if there was, a good candidate that had,
I was going RFK till he dropped out.
Had a chance of winning again with the ranked choice voting and all of that. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like RFK, even though I disagree with a shit ton of the stuff that he says and does, like he had enough polling numbers to, I would not under any circumstance knock you for voting for RFK. as a matter of fact, I think
wouldn't
that
have
all of
cared
those
if you
votes for RFK should, people should put their weight behind him. But
elaborate.
I just think that if a candidate has that much support, people should vote for them. Again, like we were saying, like it shouldn't feel like a wasted vote to vote for a third party candidate.
Are you saying they should still vote for him now?
I mean, I don't see why not. He suspended his
because
candidacy.
He dropped out.
He didn't drop out. Like, unless he did officially drop out. But as far as I know, he only suspended his candidacy. He's still technically in the race, which is why some of the states were not letting him drop out.
So this sounds like a cheap way to try to get people. I mean, statistically speaking, most RFK voters went to Trump. Not all, but most. This seems like a way of saying, "Hey, you guys should stop following that guy, so my guy can win." Not saying
no. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying like if you wanted to vote for
let me get to what RFK said.
Whatever a third party candidate.
I've donated to RFK. I'm in his mail list. I do surveys. I actually really supported RFK. And what he said is, if the reason he's suspending his campaign and not canceling it and not ending it is for a couple of reasons. The primary one is he still wants people that are not in swing states to vote for him because he wants that third-party option to open up on a national scale. He said if you're in a swing state, he wants you to vote for Trump because he, like myself, this is a big reason I support him, has been disillusioned by the Democratic Party and what they've been doing over the course of the last 20 years. And so for that reason, he said, if you're in Montana, right, a solid red state, vote RFK. Trump's still going to win. And again, this is his philosophy. Trump's still going to win. If you're in California, vote RFK because Kamala's still going to win that state no matter what. So that's why he suspended it and didn't end his campaign because he still wants the opportunity for a third party breakout to happen. I think it's if 10% of the popular vote goes to a third party, they increases funding. It increases the eligibility for third parties in debates. It opens up a whole bunch of doors as far as the third parties go. So that's his stance on it. I know you said you didn't know if he'd suspend or not. That's what he did. That's why he did it. There was actually in his hour and a half long secession speech.
Yeah, and that's what I was referencing. I didn't know if he had since then, totally dropped out. But no, I agree with voting for a third party candidate. Even right now, I know everything's all supercharged on Trump versus democracy or Kamala versus democracy and all of this kind of shit, but like if that's the politician that aligns with your values most closely, vote for them. I'm not saying like vote for them in a swing state or don't vote for them in a swing state. I'm just saying vote for the person. Just get out there and vote for the person you think represents your values the most closely or you think will represent you as their constituency the best. I'm not trying to like tell people to go out there and vote against or vote for. We can talk about this a different time, maybe after the election, but like one of the things that confuses me about RFK's campaign is the differing lawsuits in different states, like Pennsylvania versus Michigan getting on or off the ballot. Like they're both swing states, and he has different, requests in both states. And
yeah, so I can actually, I can explain that a little bit. A lot of that was lawfare from the Democratic Party. I know that just sounds like me being biased against the Democrats, but it literally was. They levied lawsuits in multiple different states that he tried to get on the ballot. And a big one was rejecting... So there's certain criteria that you have to meet to get into a ballot. If I was talking about RFK, I probably would have had these requirements ready, but I don't. So Basically, it's you have to have a certain number of polls. We'll say 5 for sake of conversation. You have to have 1 million signatures. You have to have, of those 5 polls, you have to have a certain percentage, like say 10% of the vote. I think it's much lower than that, but for sake of conversation, 5 polls at 10%, plus you have to have 1,000 signature petition, and you have to have so many individual donors, grassroots donors, essentially. And what the Democratic Party was doing is what they were taking up lawsuits in states, primarily going after his polls and saying that this isn't a good enough poll, so he can't get on the ballot. And they were doing that state after state after state after state, trying to cut him off. And so that's another thing I have against the Democratic Party is they tend to be they tout themselves as the party of democracy, but they don't want democracy to work. They don't want a third party to get in there for people to vote for because it's not beneficial to them. So they're only democratic when it works in their favor, from my observation at least.
Just to interject here, I also disagree with that. I've done a fair bit of research on this, and I think that's pretty shitty of those, lobbyist groups to launch, lawsuits. And honestly, like if there was some evidence that the, DNC as a whole was involved in, going after those people, that could also be one of those big, as we've seen people try and go after racketeering charges and that kind of thing, conspiracy, like, I think that would be a pretty big deal if, there was some conspiracy to be like, hey, we want to get these third-party voters off the ballot so that we get more votes to ourselves. Pretty shitty.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's pretty heavy proof, and it's across the board. There's not a single Republican that has gone to get Trump off the ballot. $0 have been spent. I think super PACs spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million. I'd have to look at the numbers again. It's been a few months since I looked at it.
Probably to get 4 Trump or 5. Off the ballot?
No, to get RFK off the ballot. Which is another problem that RFK had.
I was going to say there's definitely a lot of Republican dollars going to get Trump off the ballot. Or
no, RFK.
But, okay, I see what you're saying.
And the Democrats have put tens of millions of dollars into it, which is another problem RFK had with his campaign. It's another reason he stepped out is because he was spending more money on legal fees than he could afford to spend on get out the vote efforts or he could do on advertising. All of his small campaigns funding, because we're not talking $1 billion like Kamala has raised. We're talking tens of millions that RFK has raised. All of that money was going to lawfare, and he couldn't even set up campaign offices in a lot of states because the money wasn't there because you're spending it all in courts. So that's another problem I have with the Democratic Party, the party of democracy, is that they really don't give a shit about democracy unless it means that they win. So, but that's me on my soapbox. But I would be hard pressed to find someone that could convince me that that's the democratic process is bullying third-party competitions out through legal means, like lawfare, essentially.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of charged rhetoric around both sides with that. As I alluded to before, talking about the threat to democracy, these different election things, just to present a counterpoint, so it's not totally one-sided here. The liberal point of view is that the Republican states are making it harder to register to vote, stay on the voter roll, to be represented via gerrymandering, all these things. Obviously, I understand that there's also gerrymandering that happens on both sides.
The most recent one actually was in favor of Democrats by quite a large margin.
What do you mean, gerrymandering like lawsuit?
No, gerrymandering in which districts ended up going from red to blue occurred more often for this run of gerrymandering than blue to red.
Yeah, I think
so. Gerrymandering. Well, I think gerrymandering is horrible.
I think those standalone statistics, you kind of have to look at it over like a timeline. Okay. So if you look at a certain district area over a timeline, some of them have been like clearly gerrymandered to, cut right down the middle of an urban area for Republicans. That way, it kind of spreads out the vote or whatever. There's some pretty good, infographics if you want to look up like how gerrymandering actually works, since it sounds like no matter how you split a square, it's going to be a square, but
And I also realized that
not talking to you specifically,
cycles
just
before
like the
that
audience.
Were in favor of Republicans. So I see that as well. But you can't really complain about gerrymandering when the most recent occurrence of it benefited you. You know what I mean? You had a couple of other retorts that I would like to get to. But they slipped my mind. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then obviously the big one being the January 6th and the elector scheme, all that kind of stuff. I don't want to get into that right now. It's just that's a big point that's out there. We can discuss the merits of it at a later date, but we're getting pretty close to wrap up here, so I don't want to open that big can of worms right now.
One thing I want to express to everyone that will or will not listen to this is I don't think either side particularly believes anything they're saying. If the Democrats believe that Trump was really a threat to democracy, Chuck Schumer wouldn't have been sitting 2 seats from him at that Catholic banquet. You don't go to a comedic dinner with Hitler. It doesn't make sense. The rhetoric doesn't make sense at all on that. And just like Trump says that Kamala's stupid, he obviously doesn't think that. Otherwise, he wouldn't be pouring tens of millions of dollars into a campaign to defeat her. It's just they're all just saying things that neither one of them believe. I don't think any actual politician really thinks that Trump is a threat to democracy. Otherwise, they would be okay. You know what I mean? If you say somebody's Hitler, they're a threat to democracy, they're whatever they are, and then there's an assassination attempt, you don't say, "I hope he's okay." If there was an assassination attempt on Hitler, the Jews wouldn't have said, "Man, I hope that guy's okay." You know what I mean? So I just want to say that a lot of this rhetoric is specifically used to charge us, and they don't buy it, so we shouldn't buy it on both sides.
I 100%
Let's look at policy
agree.
Prescriptions.
Don't forget to see the forest through the trees here, right? Like, you're being come at from all sides with these supercharged political ads, the posts you see on social media, all of these things are, being incredibly weighted by one side or the other. There's tons of misinformation out there, and it's super hard to get, the actual story, or at least, 65% of the facts within, that breaking period of a story coming out. So I have a feeling that, like you and I discussed, we're going to see some big shit coming out here in the next week or so. Mm-hmm.
I don't think it'll be this week. I think it'll be next week.
Yeah,
I think they want it right before.
Honestly, that timeline is getting closer and closer to the election as, the freedom of information becomes more fluid. Like, and by that I mean, like, the word can spread faster. So, if one party or another shares something that's obviously fabricated or easy to disprove, that shit's gonna spread within 2 days, right? So they can't put something out that's, an obvious sham like 2 weeks before the election.
Yeah, because there's too much time to debunk it. No, I agree.
Exactly.
And the cycle's so quick that something else will happen already, and that'll be nothing. I suspect that within the last 3 days up to the election, we see something pop.
And I do just want to piggyback off something that you said. Regardless of who becomes president, like, we're not going to see the end of democracy. It's going to continue to just go on as it is. If Kamala becomes president, everyone's going to bitch about her economic policies and her, government spending for 4 years. And if Trump becomes president, everyone's going to bitch about how much of a dickhead he is, and, that he isn't a normal politician, and that he's, doing all these things that go against what we've, worked towards in international relations, and, that he's too hard on, immigration and all of this kind of stuff. But stuff's going to go on. It's just going to... it's going to be the same politics that it always has been. If I'm wildly wrong, then
we'll have other shit to worry about.
I guess we're gonna have a whole nother thing to talk about on this podcast if we even keep doing it.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how bad it gets, right? I think for the most part, if we get one thing out of this election, I hope it's that we all can sit down, take stock of what happened, regardless of which way it went, and ask ourselves as individuals and as a people, is this how we want to keep our country moving forward? Or do we want to start voting for people that are actually worth a damn? Making politicians earn us and not just get us, as I mentioned earlier. And also, I think collectively we need to get more proactive. I think that a lot of, and I mean this strictly in a nonviolent manner. I'm speaking more about like voting in your local elections, because I know a lot of people don't vote in anything besides the primary. I think we should all sit down and be like, look, we only interact in this once every 4 years, and it seems like we're not getting shit done. That's because we're not. Let's focus on the local municipal elections, the state elections, and then we'll actually be a lot more educated in 4 years when it's time to do this whole shit show again. And hopefully we got some better people up there.
Yeah, no, well said. Definitely pay attention to your down ballot folks. You don't, even as charged as this national election is, you don't have to, vote blue or red all down the ballot. Like, especially on some of these smaller issues, there's tons of crazies out there that you should avoid, and tons of rational, level-headed people that you can vote to elect. So
if you're blue no matter who, or red till you're dead, you're wrong either way.
I agree. So do your research.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think we've overkilled our time slot a little bit. So I'd like to end this the same way we always do. And thank everybody for listening. And Mike, I love you, buddy.
I love you too, brother. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.